Have you ever dreamt of hopping in the airplane and flying to Airventure Oshkosh? It's a bucket list flight that we're going to fly in X-Plane 11. Hey everyone, it's Clay from Clayviation.com. Today we're going to embark on an adventure that most pilots dream of. Over the next 5 or so flights, we'll travel from Nashville, Tennessee, a place near and dear to me, along the 500-mile route to Oshkosh, Wisconsin, visiting Louisville, Indianapolis, and Chicago along the way. As we arrive to Oshkosh, we'll study and fly the famous NOTAM, a detailed notice to airmen outlining the arrival route and process, where we'll fly it as true to real life as we can before rocking our wings for air traffic control and landing on one of the legendary colored dots at Whitman Regional Airport in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, among thousands of the privileged few who get to fly to the mecca of aviation. Today our topic is checklists. We're flying from Nashville, Tennessee to Louisville, Kentucky, highlighting the various checklists used along the way in our Airfoillabs Cessna 172. In the real world, checklists are a vital part of flying. In the sim world, you could probably get away without a checklist, especially in this airplane. Throttle up, throttle down, right? But the more you put into the sim, the more you'll get back. And as you transition to more complicated airplanes, these checklists are a great guide to learning the ropes. Today, I'll show you a couple different kinds of checklists that I use, starting with how I map the Airfoillabs checklist to my keys. But we'll also look at a plugin called XChecklist that allows you to load and edit checklists and even have a copilot voice call out the checklist to you. So let's get going. We can go over to this little arrow on the left-hand side and open up the menu for this Airfoillabs Cessna 172. Go down to Checklist to pop open the checklist. From there, we can arrow left and right, and we have a great checklist in front of us to get through everything. The problem is it's a little bit cumbersome to have to click through everything all the time. I like to map it to keys. So to do that, open your settings menu and go over to the keyboard section. The first option, or depending on what you have loaded, the first option might be this 172. And if you go down to menu, you're going to actually see several options here, and the three you're looking for are the show and hide checklist menu, the checklist page down, and checklist page up. I use the A key for my show and hide checklist, and then Z and X for the page down and page up. And once you type those keys in, it did override a couple of other things that I didn't feel was necessary to use on my keyboard, but you could also assign those to joystick commands if you'd rather. But now when I push A, our checklist comes up, so we can toggle that up and down, and then Z and X is now going to flip through the pages. Kind of handy. And that is the default checklist. Now let's look at installing XChecklist in here. I have a link in the description where you can download XChecklist, but once you get it downloaded and unpack the folder, you're going to want to get your X-Plane folder open as well as your XChecklist folder open to get this installed. You're going to see several files in the XChecklist folder, and depending on the particular version you get, depending on how old this video is, it might be a little bit different than what you see, but there is a manual that should be in there with it, and that's going to tell you exactly what you need to know. But here's what worked for me. I took the XChecklist folder that's inside the main XChecklist folder that you download, and I dragged that over into my X-Plane 11 folder, into the Resources, and then Plugins folder. There it is right there. I also had to, if you open up XChecklist, there's this mac.xpl. I had to drag that over here as well. And at first it wasn't working well for me, and I did some research, and that's what I determined worked. I'm on a Mac, that worked for me. I'm not a computer programmer, so that might not work for you, but it's what worked for me. The other thing you need to do is you'll find that there is this clist.txt file. That's the actual checklist that you'll be using. So if you go and download different checklists for different airplanes, clist.txt is the checklist file you're going to be using. And where you're going to put that is in the actual aircraft menu. So if we go back to the main X-Plane 11 folder and click on aircraft, and in this case we're in the Airfoillabs Cessna 172, and I just drag that clist right on over into that main folder, and at that point X-Plane can read and access it. And that's really all it took for me to get the XChecklist going. So let's open up the sim and see what we can learn. Now that we're the sim, we can access XChecklist by going to Plugins to XChecklist, and we can go to Open Setup to get things like we like it. A couple of key points you can go through here and play with. Turn Copilot on is actually something that if you have something called data refs, in the XChecklist file, it's going to actually have the copilot do this for you, do the different various items for you. I don't particularly like that in this case, but I do like the voice prompt, so it reads it out to us. We could turn that off as well if you just want the checklist without the constant voice. So if that bothers you, just turn off the voice prompt. Pretty cool. Auto hide will automatically take the checklist and hide it after a few seconds, which will turn off as well. So to actually pull it up, we can go to Plugins, back to XChecklist, and just go to Open Checklist. And there it is, Airfoillabs Cessna 172 by Clayviation. Now I took a checklist file, clist.txt, and actually adapted it to more closely match that checklist that is already in the Airfoillabs 172. So that way, depending on which checklist we use, whether it's XChecklist or whether it's the default checklist, we're going through the same series of steps every time. I'm a big fan of that. So if you want to download a copy of this clist.txt file, I'll have a link in the description. All I ask is that you subscribe to the blog, and that's all there. Click the link, it'll ask you to subscribe to the blog. I'd love to have you keep reading about my weekly aviation topics. So let's look at how we can map this to our keys as well. Go up to the settings and over to keyboard. And if you go down to this Be Good and then XChecklist, it's going to have all the items here. Now I've got it mapped with my keys 1 through 5, which overrode a few things like flaps and stuff, but I don't really use that on my keyboard. I have that all mapped to my joystick. You can map these also to your joystick if you'd prefer, whatever keys you find handy. I personally like 1 to 5, and here's why. I'll actually open the checklist with the 1 key, close the checklist with the 5 key, which is hide. That's reload and hide. And then next in previous, I have set to 2 and 3, so I can scroll back and forth. And then number 4 toggles the item as checked. So that's really handy to have. Now that all that's set up, let's go and open it with the 1 key. And you can see we can now scroll through.
Starting engine.
And it's going to read us
inspection.
Each checklist. So let's get going. The scope of today is to take you through each different checklist in the airplane, and I'm going to go through a little bit of detail about why it is that we do the things that we do. But this is primarily for those of you who might be curious as to exactly how you need to go through these steps. And if you're a pilot and you're practicing checklists, I highly encourage you to grab the checklist that you can download from me and adapt that to your own checklist. If that's something that you want to use the simulator to practice, then you can pretty easily see when you open up that clist.txt file how you can change the various checklist items in there. It's really not that complicated, but you'll see it when you open it. So let's get going. So I've loaded us up here at KBNA in Nashville, and we're going to go through some of our checklists, and we're going to mix up which checklist we use. So since we have the same checklist files in both XChecklist and the default checklist for this airplane, we'll kind of switch it up. Sometimes we use voice prompts, sometimes we won't. We're going to start off without using the voice prompts so that I can kind of walk you through it. Let's open Setup, let's uncheck the voice prompts, and we'll get going. Open up our checklist. And let's see, before starting engine checklist. Now, one thing about checklists that I like to do is, before each checklist, I like to say the name of the checklist, and then at the end of the checklist, I say the name of the checklist and the word complete. So at the beginning of the checklist, it's before starting engine check, and then at the end of the checklist, it's before starting engine checklist complete. So let's get going. Some of these things we're going to assume that we've done that don't really apply so much in the sim, but the goal today is to show you kind of what the flow of the checklist looks like and what it is exactly you're looking at in the airplane to help you get through these if this is new to you. So pre-flight inspection, something we did before, we'll call that complete. Cell phones are off, are yours. Passenger briefing are complete. Seatbelts adjusted and locked, and the seats. Brakes, we can go ahead and test and set. In this case, we're going to do another brake test before we start taxiing, but just make sure that your B key is activated or your parking brake is pulled in this case. Circuit breakers, we can check that those are in. Each of these little circuit breakers actually can pop out if you were to pull them. So you want to make sure that each of these circuit breakers are in, which is going to close the circuit and give you the connection that you want. Electrical equipment off. We want to make sure all of these switches and electrical equipment down here is off. Everything is cold and dark. And the avionics master switch specifically is off. Fuel selector valve is both. So if we go down here and actually kind of look down, we can see fuel selector valve is in fact both. You could move that to left or to right, but in this case we're going to keep it to both. And fuel shutoff valve push in. This is this red knob here. If we were to pull it out, that would be our fuel shutoff. Avionics circuit breakers. You can check to make sure those are in. These are the circuit breakers that are on this higher panel here. Just make sure all those look good, which they do. Okay, and that was before starting engine check complete. Starting engine checklist. Throttle will open a 1/4 inch. Mixture, make sure it's idle cutoff, red knob here. Prop area, we can look outside, make sure there's no one standing around, no other airplanes nearby. Master switch, let's move this down just a bit here. Master switch comes on. Flashing beacon, BCN, comes on. If engine is cold, which it is, you turn the fuel pump on, which is this switch, and then the mixture goes rich, red knob, until you see a fuel flow over here, which we do, which means the mixture comes back to cutoff, and then the fuel pump comes off. And the ignition goes to start. And basically with a key over here, you go to right, left, both, and then the last one is start. So push and hold for start. And once that comes alive, the mixture goes to rich. That's ignition, mixture. Throttle, we'll check at 1,000. Oil pressure, we can go over here to the oil pressure and make sure that the oil pressure needle is within this little green arc. And that looks good. Mixture, lean for taxi. Some engine manufacturers recommend leaning for taxi or on the ground, sometimes at higher elevations. We're not going to for the purposes of today. That's starting engine check complete. After start checklist. Flaps, let's go back a bit. Let's make sure those flaps are pulled up, which are down here, bottom right hand corner. We'll go and pull those up. Avionics master switch we can bring on. Radios on, those come on automatically with this, and the ATIS we can obtain. So as soon as we load up our COM1 here, we can actually get our ATIS, which is 135.1. The thing about this checklist that's kind of handy is it'd be easy to say, okay, we'll come back for our ATIS when that loads up. Let's go ahead and do these other things. Well, in this case, this kind of forces you to do things in the right order and wait to do them, which is handy in some ways. So our ATIS at BNA is 135.1. Let's go ahead and see if we can get big knob to get to 135. And yes, we'll go up here and do the flip over to 1. There we are. Let's flip that into the active.
Nashville Intel Information Oscar. 1200 Zulu weather. Wind calm, visibility more than 10. Sky conditions 10,000 scattered. Temperature 19, dew point -18. Altimeter 3000. Arriving runways 02 center, 02 right, 02 left. Departing runways 02 center, 02 right, 02 left. Advise on initial contact. You have Oscar.
Okay, so 3000 is our altimeter setting, and what we do is this little knob on the altimeter moves this number in the Colesman window, and we set our altimeter to the value there. And now we should be reading field elevation, which is 599, so that's pretty close at Nashville. So we've got our altimeter set, our heading indicator. And what we do for our heading indicator is we just make sure that our compass, which shows that we're facing west, matches with our heading indicator, which shows we're facing west. If it didn't, we could use this black knob to kind of move that back and forth and align that heading indicator. That's a gyro instrument, so it does drift every so often, so we kind of keep lining that up as we fly every so often. Heading indicator set. Navigation lights on as required. We don't need them right now. It's a daytime flight. If we did, we would actually turn our nav lights on here. Got a great night flight video on that from the Bahamas bucket list video. After start check complete. Now, sometimes the checklists flip over automatically to the next ones. I've set the checklist up in this case to flip automatically, if that makes sense. In this case, it doesn't. I want it to stop, so we can just now go over and push 3 and get to the next one. So our taxi check will be next. We would assume we call for our clearance and be ready to roll. So now we'll get a taxi check going. We're going to release our parking brake by pressing B. And then as we get moving a little bit, we'll throttle up, and then we'll just test our brakes to make sure they work. And I've got a key command mapped on my yoke for that. So, brakes look good. And then finally, as we taxi, and we make turns, we check our turn coordinator down here to make sure that the miniature airplane turns with us in the direction of the turn and that the ball swings to the outside of the turn. We also make sure that our heading indicator is turning with us and showing known headings. That is taxi check complete. We'll stop off prior to taking off and do our run up, which is also known as our before takeoff checklist. If you'll notice, the aircraft can be a little bit dark depending on the sunlight. One thing you can do is go down to these panel lights at the bottom next to your throttle, and if you turn those clockwise, it lights up the instrument column and then the panel as well. So that's kind of nice if you need a little extra light. So for our run up, we're going to go through now, make sure our parking brake before takeoff checklist. Parking brake is set. Passenger seat backs are upright. How's yours? Seats and seat belts are set. I'm buckled. You're buckled. Doors and windows closed and locked. We can actually look, and this airplane does actually open and close doors, so we can look and make sure that those are closed and locked. Flight controls free and correct. If you go to an outside view of the airplane, let's spin around a little bit, and I like to actually fly a box where I turn my yoke to the left and I pull my yoke backwards, and I turn my yoke to the right, and then I push the yoke forward, and I make sure that that box all looks correct. So what that looks like is up on the left, up in the back, up on the right, down in the back. So let's go back to the cockpit view now. Flight controls are free and correct, not hitting our knees or anything like that. Flight instruments, check and set. So if we go in a little bit, just want to check our 6-pack and make sure that our airspeed's reading 0, miniature airplane is level. We can actually put that right on the horizon for us. That our altimeter's reading field elevation and the Colesman window set with our altimeter setting. Turn coordinator is level, ball is in the center. There's no flag back here. And we're looking to make sure that we've got a known heading, correct heading on our heading indicator there, which it does match with our compass. Vertical speed is 0. Flight instruments are checked and set. Fuel quantity check. That's just right over here behind this checklist. Let's see if we can move out of the way a little bit. Here, fuel quantity, we got full tanks on both. Mixture is full rich in our red knob. Fuel selector valve, let's just look down and make sure that looks to be both, which it is. And this is the actual kind of run up here. So let's get a view that's going to enable us to see everything we need to see, and we'll do it. So we're going to throttle up to 1800 RPM. Nice and smooth up to 1800, and get us set there and make sure that we're nice and in place. Okay. And then we're going to check the magnetos. And to check the magnetos, we go over here to the key, and we're just going to click this over to the left twice, over to right. And what we should see is a drop on our RPMs, which we do. Okay, now we're going to click the key back to both, and we should see a rise back to 1800. Okay, that's our right check. Now we're going to click the key to the left one, which is over to left. And we should see our drop, which we do. It's about 1700. And then we get our key back to both, one click over, and we should see a rise. That is our magneto check. Now with our engines high, we're going to make sure that our vacuum gauge looks good. Let's see if I can move this checklist again. Vacuum gauge is this needle, and that looks in the green. Engine instruments and ammeter, what we're looking for is our oil temperature and our pressure to be in the green arc, and our ammeter to be showing a slight positive charge here. The annunciator panel should be clear, which is this little black box up here. If we had any low voltage or low fuel or any other number of warnings that we could have, that would be showing up there. Annunciator panel's clear. And now we can move our throttle back to 1,000 RPM. Okay, we can set our radios. We're not actually going to tune in any frequencies, but this would be where we'd set our radios in. The nav and GPS switch is this little button right up here, and that's going to be the difference in whether this CDI here is pulling from GPS data or nav data, which is the radio data. So toggling that back and forth. Got some info on that in our Bound for the Bahamas series on GPS. Nav GPS switch is set. Autopilot is off. We can go down to our autopilot and just make sure that our autopilot is not on and active here. Manual electric trim. In this case, we can look down at our trim, make sure that our trim wheel is set. We can arrow up for takeoff. If you don't have that keyed to anything, I like to have that as a button on my yoke. That's a must, is the trim adjustments. And elevator trim set for takeoff. Which manual electric trim, if you want to check electric trim, in this case there's really no difference, because if you have a button set, it functions as electric trim. Electric trim in the airplane is actually a little electric knob that's on the yoke handle itself. And then we can release our parking brakes. Finally, after we're cleared for takeoff, we can record our departure time. We can do one last check of our instruments to make sure everything looks in the green with our engine and that everything looks good on our flight instruments. We can turn our transponder to altitude, which is this knob just here, on over to altitude. And we can turn our landing light on, and also our strobes on. Before takeoff checklist complete. Let's get in the air. We go ahead and enable our voice prompt now and explore that just a bit. And the next thing is our after takeoff check. We can make sure our oil pressure still looks in the green.
Check.
So we're looking good.
Flaps.
Flaps are going to retract.
Retract. Aircraft lighting.
Aircraft lighting as required. In this case, we're going to keep on what we have. After takeoff check complete.
Climb. Airspeed.
Can also do
Cruise. Power. Climb. Airspeed. After takeoff. Oil pressure. Climb. Airspeed.
airspeed 70 to 85. We're looking good there.
70-85 knots. Throttle.
Make sure our throttle's full.
Mixture.
Make sure our mixture is rich. Climb checklist complete. All right, now that we're leveling off at 5,500, we'll go ahead and go through our cruise checklist. Power set, which as we pick up airspeed, we're going to have to adjust our power until we're at cruising airspeed. In this case, I like to plan for about 2,400 RPM. So power set.
SET. Elevator trim.
Elevator trim. Going to adjust that. We have the autopilot flying for us, so the trim is controlled, but if you were hand flying it, we would adjust our elevator trim to make sure we were kind of hands off and not having to force the airplane up or down.
Adjust mixture.
Now, mixture lean, as we get our power set and we're approaching a nice cruise speed here, let's look at one way to lean the mixture out. So take a look at the tachometer, and you can see that we're set at 2400 RPM. And if we start to slowly pull this red mixture knob out, we're going to start to get a little bit of rise in the RPM. So just kind of keep working that out, keep engine that out, and eventually we're going to get from a rise in that RPM to a slight fall in that RPM, which is right about there. And as we get that, we're just going to push that red knob in just a little bit to go back to that upper end of things. And that is how we lean out our mixture for cruise flight. Mixture lean.
Landing light.
Landing light. We bring off.
Off.
There we have it. Now the next checklist is perhaps the most important checklist of the whole flight, and we're going to have our co-pilot read it to us.
Subscribe checklist, like this video, subscribe to the channel, comment below, share with a friend, subscribe checklist complete.
All right, there you have it. We're going to head on up to Louisville, cruise for a little bit, and then we'll get a descent checklist in as we get a little bit closer. Enjoy the flight. As we approach Louisville, we can go ahead and start a descent and get our descent checklist in. So let me go ahead and set up a descent on our autopilot. We're going to just simply press the down key and start getting a vertical speed of about 500 feet per minute. And we're going to pull our power back just a bit as we do that, because we're going to pick up RPMs if we don't. And let's go ahead and open up, let's do the default checklist for this one, and get a descent check going. Seats and belts secure, I'm secure, you're secure. Fuel selector, let's look down and make sure that's on both, which it is. Mixture enrich, and in this case we want to slowly enrich it a couple of notches with each little bit we go down. We don't want to shock cool the engine by slamming that mixture forward, so we're just going to keep working that in over the course of our descent. Engine instruments, let's go and check those. I just disengaged our autopilot as I did that. I bumped the yoke. We've got our oil temperature and pressure in the green, vacuum's looking good, ammeter's looking good, everything's looking good over on our engine instruments. We can make sure our avionics are set if we'd like to do that. We could go ahead and plug in the Vortac. Why don't we do that? The Louisville Vortac 114.8. Let's go ahead and click that on in. Let's see, 114 is already in there. Let's go up to, whoops, push CV, 114. Let's go up to 114.8. Flip that in. So we got that tuned. COM 1, let's listen to nav 1. See if we can identify that Vortac. Alright, so we are tuned and identified on that Vortac. Avionics are sat. Nav, GPS switch. Now look, we've got our GPS showing on our switch right here. So we need to flip that over to nav so that our CDI is now reading from our radio data, not our GPS data. Aircraft lights is required. We can go ahead and turn on our landing light. And pitot heat is required. We don't need to turn that on for now. That's descent check complete. All right, let's go ahead and get a before landing checklist in. We'll do a GUMPS check, We're actually going to do that GUMPS check closer to final because that's actually covered in a lot of this right here. So let's look at fuel selector both. We're on both. Landing light is on. Our landing light's on. Seatbelts and harnesses, I'm good, you're good. Flaps as required, we'll start putting those in as we get a little bit closer. Mixture rich, we need to go ahead and bump that mixture a little bit more forward to rich. Autopilot off, we've still got our autopilot flying, we can go ahead and disengage that. Normal approach at 60 to 70, short soft field approach 55. So at this point all we need to do is put our flaps in and do a final GUMPS check before we land. We do that final GUMPS check. G is for gas. Make sure we have gas in the tanks, and our fuel selector valve is on both. U is for undercarriage, which is down and locked. M is for mixture, mixture rich. P is for props, which are forward. It's fixed in this airplane. And S is for seats, seat belts, and switches, which our lights and our switches are as we like it. Our seat belts are nice and tight, and we're ready to land. Alright, we'll stop once we're clear of the runway here and do an after landing checklist. Let's pull that up. After landing checklist, exterior lights is required. We can bring this landing light off. Pitot heat was never on. Mixture, we can lean for taxi, which we are not going to do. Wing flaps can come up. Transponder back to standby. And elevator trim to takeoff. After landing check complete. Let's head over to parking. Alright, and we'll park it here for a night. Let's finish out with our X checklist. We're going to go ahead and take the voice prompts off. And parking. Avionics master comes off. Panel lights, click those off. There we are. Both of those panel lights. Mixture, we can pull the idle cutoff. Master switch off. For some reason that mixture doesn't like to come out all the way. There it goes. Alright, master switch is off. Ignition, let's go ahead and move that to off now that the engine's stopped. And we can close the cabin air, which we can't do in the simulator here, and Hobbs and takt time record off of the clock if we were going to record our times. Securing the aircraft, let's make sure the master switch is off, which it is. Electrical equipment is off. Avionics master is off. Wing flaps are retracted. Air inlets we could close on both sides in the real airplane. Control lock installed, which I can't figure out how to actually install the control lock. If you know, let me know. I can figure out how to get it off, and you can go over here to where is it? To quick start, and you can actually go click. If you click cold and dark, it will install the control lock among other things and turn everything off. But I can't figure out just control lock. Let me know if you know how to do that. Fuel selector valve, left or right. Just click that over. Cabin door lock, cargo, this is all outdoor stuff now. Assuming we got out of the airplane, which we can actually do. Let's do it. What do you say? Let's open up the airplane. Let's step outside by clicking on the wheel fairing right there. Yeah. Close that up. Awesome. Make sure that cabin door is locked. Make sure that cargo door is locked back here. Aircraft and intake coverage, you can actually put those on too. Right there. We can do our tie downs. We could go through and click all the tie downs So there we have it. We have our airplane tied down. Cell phones back on. Close our flight plan. Look forward to seeing you next time where we continue our journey up north to Oshkosh. Until then, enjoy your flying.